Good morning and welcome to the Environmental Protection Commission meeting this August 19th, 2021. We will start with a Pledge of Allegiance and an invocation given by our chaplain, Commissioner Stacy White.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll ask that you please stand at this time for the pledge, followed by the invocation. Attention, salute, pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the environmental resources that you have given us, like clean water and clean air. And thank you for the professionals and the experts on our staff that help us to keep these things as they are and to help us to mitigate for problems as they occur and to help us set policy that keeps these things in place. Thank you for the industry that allows us to live comfortable, modern lives, and just pray that you'll help us to set policy that keeps all of these things in the right balance. And as always, I pray for our first responders and members of our armed forces. Pray that you will guide them and keep them safe each and every day. I ask for these blessings in your heavenly name. Amen.
Amen. And now we'll have a roll call.
Smith?
Here.
Cullen?
Here.
Hagan?
Here.
Kemp? Myers?
Here.
Overman?
Here.
White?
Here.
All right, thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you. And Ms. Doherty, do we have any changes to the agenda or any removal of items?
Yes, Commissioner. Is my mic on? No. Okay. Is it on now? Mm-hmm. Yes, Commissioner. We had a Scrivener error from minutes. I think it had to do with the acronym for the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. That's the only change to the consent agenda.
Thank you. And we have no recognitions and proclamations today. And I understand
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. Do we need to have a motion to accept those changes?
Yes, I was going to ask if you got a motion.
I forgot that.
Move the changes.
Thank you. I forgot when we have changes, we have to approve them. Motion to approve by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Myers. And let's take a roll call vote.
Smith?
Yes.
Cullen?
Yes.
Hagan?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes.
Overman?
Yes.
White?
Yes.
Motion carried 6-0.
Thank you. No recognitions and proclamations today, and I understand there's no public comment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. That takes us to the approval of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second. We have a motion to approve by Commissioner White, second by Commissioner Myers. We'll take a roll call vote.
Smith?
Yes.
Cullen?
Yes.
Hagan?
Yes.
Myers?
Yes.
Overman?
Yes.
White?
Yes.
Motion carried 6-0.
Thank you. Now we can have our presentations, which I've been really looking forward to. I had asked our EPC staff and the scientists that we're so fortunate to have working with us to prepare these reports. And the first one on the phosphogypsum stacks, I know that all of you, like myself, have been getting a lot of questions from our constituents in the wake of the Piney Point disaster about how vulnerable we are with the gypsum stacks in our county and what the status of them is. And so I just feel very grateful that we have this Environmental Protection Commission avenue of being able to explore and learn about these items so we can better manage them and inform our constituents as well. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Doherty to begin.
Thank you, Commissioner. The first item, 8A, is the status report on phosphogypsum stacks in Hillsborough County. This was requested by the board, and there has been a lot of interest not only from the citizens of Hillsborough County, but also the media. And obviously, Piney Point happened in the spring, so there's a lot of interest in this. We're going to bring up Sam El-Rabi. He's the director of the Water Division. But I did want to thank all the scientific team who helped them put this presentation together. It's quite a meaty presentation. And so with that, Sam?
Good morning, Commissioners. I'll be sharing the presentation with you right now. Is it shown?
Yes, it is.
Good morning, Commissioners. Sam El-Rabi, EPC staff, and this presentation is about the status of gypsum stacks or phosphogypsum stacks in Hillsborough County. Recall that this presentation is brought to you at your request a few months ago when you were discussing the issues stemming from the Piney Point excursions that we had in the spring. This presentation will focus on the status of gypsum stacks in Hillsborough County. Here is an aerial showing the Mosaic Riverview stack shooting from the west looking east. And in the forefront, you will see that mound is the closed gypsum stack west. It's west of Highway 41. This stack is closed and retired. To the far top of the pictures, you would see the east gypsum stack. It's the active stack in Riverview. And I will show you a close-up to that east gypsum stack. Here is looking south, and you can see the Alafaya River at the top of the picture, south of the active gypsum stack. There are two chemical processing plants in our county that produce fertilizer. Both are owned by Mosaic. These phosphate processing plants, the primary role is to produce fertilizer for the agricultural industry. Phosphate minerals, as it exists in the ground, is not soluble and it's hard to be used by the plants and hard to access. So to provide the ag community and the plants with the phosphate it needs in a form that it can uptake through its roots, the phosphate rock is converted into phosphoric acid, and it is that phosphoric acid that is used to make fertilizer. Phosphate rock is transported from the mines to fertilizer manufacturing plants. It reacts with sulfuric acid to create phosphoric acid in the making of the fertilizer. The principal fertilizer products of this industry is diammonium phosphate, which is a water soluble, and it will be available for plant uptake through the root system. This is a simplified diagram, depicts the chemical processing of phosphate fertilizer production, where phosphate rock is brought into the plant and into the ball mill where it's ground up, and then into a reactor where it mixes and reacts with sulfuric acid, and then into the filtration system where phosphoric acid is produced. And then as a byproduct of this process, we have a gypsum byproduct. That gypsum is not usable, and that byproduct is stored and stacked on gypsum stacks on site. And the cooling water is reused in the process as a closed loop system in the processing. The phosphoric acid that is produced is clarified several times to produce a different grade or strength of acid, 30%, 50%, 60%. It depends on how they use it in the process. But this is a simplified process diagram for you. The byproduct that is produced, which is phosphogypsum or gypsum, is stacked on gypsum stacks on site. And here is a visual aid to assist in understanding the major components of gypsum stacks. These are engineered structures. They are built on a compacted foundation of soil and clay. At the bottom, going up, then you see that red line, that is a high-density polyethylene liner, which is an HDPE, is a thick liner to prevent migration of processed water downwards. On each side of the gypsum stack, here it is. Each side of the gypsum stack has an earthen dike parameter to contain the deposition of gypsum. And in the bottom, they have drain system to drain any poured water that goes inside to the bottom, and then it becomes part of the process water system. And as they go up in the stack, it's wide at the bottom and narrows up. It's like a pyramid structure. That's the widest point at the base and goes up in lifts and narrows as it goes up. And then they have step-in benches for maintenance and for transportation for vehicles to go up and equipment. So at the bottom, you have the widest and the most base, the most area. At the top, it narrows down. So this would aid in understanding that. Phosphogypsum itself, in the manufacturing process, every ton of phosphoric acid produced, it results in approximately 5 tons of phosphogypsum that need to be stored or stacked on site. The phosphogypsum itself contains a small amount of radioactivity due to natural occurring radium in that phosphate rock. Because of this trace amount of radioactivity, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the federal government, bans most of its uses. Since it cannot be used, the majority of all 30 million tons produced on an annual basis in Florida is stockpiled in on-site stacks. These gypsum stacks, as I said, they're engineered structures. This is a Hillsborough County map showing the location of the 2 facilities, just to give you a visual. One is in the northeast Plant City area. It's called Mosaic Plant City facility. And one is in the southwest area here in Riverview.
Can you see
That's
that?
the Mosaic Riverview facility.
Do you see it? Sam, we can't, I didn't see that. There you go. Thank you. Can you leave that up for just a moment? Okay. So these are the 2 locations of your current facilities within the county. Thank you. There you go. Go ahead.
In Riverview, in the Riverview facility, there are 2 gypsum stacks. One, as we said, is the one on the west side. It's the old closed stack, and one is active on the east side of Highway 401. That is the active gypsum stack. The active stack is a clay line, 326 acre stack, and 192 acre line with HDPE stack. And also at the southern end of it, there is a 132 acre HDPE line cooling pond for circulation of the processed water. The closed stack on the west side of 41, it's an unlined stack that was started about 100 years ago. It's a 325 acre stack with a lined auxiliary pond on top that aids with the circulation of the pond water and of the evaporation of the processed water. This aerial shows an active gypsum stack.
Excuse me.
I just want to ask a question,
yeah.
if you could go back one slide.
Your mic's not on.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I just want to ask a question, if you could go back one slide. When you say it's unlined, there's a closed stack that's unlined and it's old. What does that mean exactly?
This stack is about 100 years old. The lining requirement came later in the regulations, which is a clay lining underneath. When you start up the stack at the ground level, you line with clay and or with HDPE, high density polyethylene liner at the base, and then you stack on top of that.
Yeah, so you're saying that whatever's in there is just sort of exposed to, is just seeping into the groundwater? I mean, into the, just,
Yes.
yes.
Yes,
And it's
that's-
been there for 100 years.
Correct.
100 years?
That predates the regulations, that back from the 1920s and 30s, that predates all regulations.
So,
And I'll show you, I
Yeah.
will show you photographs down in the presentation to show how it started and how things used to be done, just to give you an idea.
but let me ask you, I mean, how long is this material hazardous for? It's 100 years old, there's no liner. It's been, I'm assuming it's been seeping into the groundwater for 100 years. How long until there's nothing even there anymore?
Well, about 20 years ago, they closed the stack, Commissioner, and there's no additional processed water that goes in and it seeps. So whatever it seeps is what was sitting on those stacks from the prior decades. And there are interception drain system at the base of the stack around it that collects, intercepts a lot of that seepage and takes it into the cooling pond system. So as it drains, as it ages, there will be less and less and less of that processed water that goes in. So there's no additional water since 20 years ago that's going on top of that stack.
And I mean, do we have any sense of how long, it takes for it to sort of, well, I mean, I'm not even going to get to the question of whether or not it was appropriate to just let it do that, but I'm wondering at what point it sort of wears itself out, I guess.
Well, obviously, it wasn't appropriate, it's not appropriate, but there were no regulations that, affect this type of industry back in the 20s, 30s, as we have them today. So we don't build stacks like this anymore. But the stack, it depends on the compaction, depends on how much water in the pores it has. It slowly drains, slowly intercepts that drain in the drain system. It could take, I don't know, I hate to guess, 30 years, 40 years before it's completely, stop leaking down into the base. It takes decades before it's completely drained. But there is a slurry system, slurry wall around the stack that holds that in a bathtub-like situation. And the drain system will intercept some of that leakage and pulls it out and becomes part of the processed water system.
Ms. Doherty, I just sense from your eyes that you wanted to say something.
Your mic's not on. There you go.
Is it on now?
Yes.
We'll reach out to the DEP, but, from what I just have heard, it's usually about 50 years. A closure plan for decanting and leaching of that water within a stack is normally 50 years. But I will reach out to Tallahassee and try to get
So
you.
we're 20 years in.
We're 20 years in, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. And while we have a break in the action, Commissioner White, you're recognized.
Thank you. Well, I think Janet's just answered the question with the 50-year number. Sam, it's been a long time since this pharmacist has dealt with this kind of chemistry. But I think one thing that Commissioner Cohen was trying to get at, though, is when you look at things like half-lives of dangerous chemicals and radioactive decay and things like that, I think one thing, I mean, I don't want to put words in Commissioner Cohen's mouth, but I think one issue he was trying to get to the bottom of is how long might it be until everything that's in that gyp stack is inert, and maybe that gets to the 50-year number that Janet has touched on. I mean, is that about what we're looking at?
Well, that's probably the way to go. I am not an expert on radioactivity and radium and the decay issues, but those stacks, they're sit there, they're closed, they're lined, they're capped, and they're grassed on the sides, and it's long-term monitoring that kind of gauges what issues they have on them. So once you retire them, once you grass them and line them on top and on the sides, your safety kind of increases exponentially instead of having them just open. So yeah, 50 years is probably the number we look at.
Thank you. And seeing no other questions, let's move along.
Here's as the stack is growing and building the sides, and as it goes up, you see the side slopes being built. They typically are bare, and as it grows, the side slopes mature a little bit, they become higher. They are grassed, and that grassing takes place to provide stability, to provide for prevention of erosion due to rain, and it also controls dust and also removes those side slopes from the watershed. This is the Plant City stack system. It was started back in the 1960s. The operations on this site was temporarily idle in December 2017. And since June of 2019, that plant has been permanently out of operation. They ceased operation in there. The closed stack to the north in the photograph you see is about 410 acres unlined stack that started back in the 1960s. The more recent stack to the south is about 478 acres. That stack is a lined stack system. Regulations and oversight. The primary jurisdiction of these plants and gypsum stacks fall under the state and the federal government authority and regulations. These plants are permitted by the DEP under NPDES permits. Those permits are federal permits delegated to the state by the federal government, by the EPA. There are scheduled inspections on these facilities, and at a minimum, you have 2 scheduled inspections, and we do those jointly in Hillsborough County with DEP. And there are several and multiple unscheduled inspections in response to facility reporting. The inspections encompass the dam compliance inspections for the integrity of those dams, berms, dikes, and the liner system. It also deals with the compliance evaluation inspections for permit compliance. There is a requirement under state law that a third-party engineer conducts a dam inspection for the entire facility. Those are experts at this type of inspections, and the reports are issued by them independently and sent to the state and to us here in Hillsborough County. Also, Mosaic is required to conduct its own inspection on site. Obviously, they are the entity that deals with the stack on a daily basis. So they have facility inspections on a daily basis twice, one in the morning and one in the evening shift. Then on a weekly basis, a supervisor will conduct a weekly inspection just to have a little bit more oversight. And on a monthly basis, the operation manager of the site conducts an inspection on a monthly basis. And all these inspectors are trained inspectors are as required by state law. Also, Mosaic is required and must report anything out of compliance with their permits, and these reporting typically trigger additional state inspections, and we also tag along with the state on these inspections. Regarding the processed water inventory, the available storage capacity for rainfall is reported on site, and certain levels triggering additional actions are also reported. And during the hurricane season, Mosaic voluntarily provides weekly updates on their surge capacity and the ability to contain rainwater. And also under the state permits, there are various requirements for routine sampling and reporting. In addition, financial assurance is submitted annually to the state DEP as required by state law. And here is more specifics on the financial assurance. Financial assurance is applicable in a variety of state regulatory programs, including landfills, RCRA, ERP, and mining and minerals. It is a mechanism to ensure environmental obligations are honored in place. The standby financial instruments include bonds, irrevocable letters of credit, and closure insurance policies. DEP requires financial assurance for gypsum stacks throughout the state to backstop and safeguard closure and to meet long-term care and obligation at the terminal closure when the stack's capacity is exhausted. These annual financial reports are submitted to the state. They're required to provide financial assurance for the following. They need to assure the cost of closure is available, cost for water management and monitoring, and long-term care for these stacks as required by State Rule 62673. In addition, here, Mosaic, EPA, and the DEP, there is a consent decree signed by the federal government and the state. The financial assurance provisions of this consent decree in the state of Florida satisfy and go beyond the rule requirements under 62673 state rule. Mosaic also has more than $500 million set aside in various instruments for the Florida facilities, in addition to a $50 million letter of credit for the state. Stack stability compliance status now. Both gypsum stack systems are currently operating in substantial compliance of their latest EPC and DEP inspections. As of 2 days ago, Riverview facility has the capacity, 26-inch of available capacity. They can contain 26 inches of rain. That's the maximum potential storage capacity they can have on site. Where at Plant City, they can contain 29 inches of rain, and that's the available maximum potential storage capacity. As you very well know, that we're in the midst of the rainy season, so those numbers, they change daily, weekly, and as we come into September and October, that storage capacity will increase as the rainy season wanes off.
And if I may interrupt you just for a second, for comparison, the Piney Point freeboard is about 10 inches, is it?
The Piney Point is 10 inches.
Yep, thank you.
Yes.
And Commissioner Overman, did you want to speak during or after? Okay, thank you very much. You can continue.
And Commissioners, the annual third-party independent engineer dam inspection, the report indicated that there's no dam integrity or stability issues requiring any immediate remedial actions. There's none of that was identified, and that report was submitted in April of this year. The financial assurance documentation that was submitted to State DEP indicate that these latest reports, the facility is in compliance with the state and federal requirement in terms of financial assurance. Enhanced protections. We have some lessons that were learned as a result of the Hurricane Francis that came through in 2004, where we had a breach in the Riverview facility. That 2004 was an active hurricane season for us. In 2004, we had a breach in the Riverview facility. The dike system on top of the gypsum stack were approximately 25 feet wide, and they were a single dike with a small beach for gypsum stacking. So when the hurricane came through and the wind and the wave action came through, it overtopped that dike system, and that's when we had the breach. Today, the top of the stacks has a 25 to 100 foot wide and a double dike system on top of the stack. So we had two lines of defense. Those things we did not have back in 2004. That is a new rule requirement and new enhancement. And also the inner dike obviously is lower than the outer dike, which acts as a containment system, just in case during a hurricane, the wave action will compromise the inner dike. The outer dike acts as a containment system, secondary containment, and prevents water from overtopping. And since 2004, we learned that construction plans for these systems need to include level requirements to prevent wave runoff or wave action, so overtopping will not happen. and eroding will become a minimal during a hurricane. The facilities also are required to provide constant review of their water inventories for each compartment and for the system as a whole. Here is a history, Commissioner Cohen and commissioners, that goes back from the 20s, 30s. I couldn't find any pictures prior to 1938. But you can see the Alafaya River is in the bottom of the picture. Right on top of it, to the north of it, is the fertilizer plant. And they used to stack the byproduct with the phosphogypsum in open field. Just it's piled and stacked in there. That was before regulations were in place. That's the stack you were asking about. That was back in 1938. In 1948, the operation obviously more intensified, as you can see in that red circle. It's just piling and having that phosphogypsum stacked in open field. Not engineered, structured, not lined. Here is in 1957, you see it has a little bit more of a form, rectangular shape, maybe a little bit of an edge to it. In 1973, it becomes a little bit more engineered. You have a dike system around it and a process water return ditch. In 1982, they expanded to the east side of Highway 41 where that process water pond, because the operations has increased on site. And that's how it looks like today. Today, we have more enhanced protections in construction, in operation, with a stacked double ditch system and double dike system. The width of the dikes on top of the stack has increased, and the liners are in place under the regulations. We no longer build stacks without liners in the bottom of the stacks. The operation plans to properly manage water inventory are in place and much more defined in state and federal law. Obviously, it's stronger regulatory oversight through reporting requirements, inspections by regulatory staff, state, local, and federal. There are third-party experts are required by law to come and do the assessments and report, and also requirements under the regulations that facility owners must have trained staff to conduct these daily, weekly, monthly inspections and oversight. The rules over the years has a lot of improvements in the design, the construction, the operation, along with the financial assurance requirements for corrective actions in closure and post-closure monitoring. So all the information we currently have today, as of today, in hand, indicate that Mosaic in Hillsborough County, the stacks systems are complying with the rule requirements, including the financial assurance, management of their operation, control of water inventories, and maintaining the dike system integrity and stability. There is no current evidence of any stability issues at the gypsum stacks we have in Hillsborough County. However, that being said, this current compliance status does not guarantee the freedom from future environmental concerns or unforeseen events. You don't have a crystal ball. It is hard to predict the future. These facilities are significant industrial operations, and they do require close oversight and monitoring. And with that, I will stop, see if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. That's a very thorough and informative explanation for us to be able to work with these issues and inform our citizens. Before I open up to questions, just because I know there are other people watching this, I want to note that I very much appreciate our Environmental Protection Commission scientists being willing to lead this discussion with us, even though much of it is beyond the regulatory purview of the Environmental Protection Commission. Most of it, in fact, is regulated by the state and federal agencies. But as I said to begin with, we are very lucky to have the staff here that can share their perspective and experience and help us to understand the issues that our constituents are talking about, as well as the whole history and mechanism of this. So as we are asking questions of our staff as knowledgeable experts with a depth of knowledge even beyond their regulatory capacity. Just want to keep that in mind. Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you. And Mr. El-Rabi, thank you so much. That was an eye-opening presentation. Seeing the regulations that has actually improved what we have here over the last several decades was impressive. Looking at what was there in 37 and other years is pretty frightening looking, actually. And it's really glad to see that there's been protections, and we've had an organization that is working to try and be as compliant as they can. If you don't mind, I'd really like to focus on slide 6, or the major components of a gypsum stack. There's an illustration there where you show how a gypsum stack is created, and it shows the settling water, the step-in, the processing water conveying ditch for an active site, and showing that the water is processed and circulated back into the system. I think I heard in your presentation say that this is the process for the active stacks, and then the closed stacks in Hillsborough County maybe be constructed this way. However, they don't have liners. Is that an accurate statement? I mean, did I hear that correctly? Let me rephrase that.
Sam, you don't mind that the stack that is in Riverview is a lined stack, both the closed one and the one that is currently under operation. The one at the north, the Mosaic that's up in they call it Plant City or Zephyr Hills, that stack, the one stack that Commissioner Cohen was talking about, is unlined, that closed stack. The other stack is lined.
Okay. So thank you very much for clarifying that. I appreciate that. So I'm less concerned about the one on Riverview, other than it's close to the shore. It's, we have the potential for flooding, and as long as it's being maintained with a liner that would actually protect the surrounding soils, that's great, because there are a lot of people who live in that area. In the closed stack that's up near Plant City, how is that, if it's not active and they're not processing water, pulling water off, and there's no liner, what risks are there to possible groundwater in that area? I'm not familiar with what the drainage process, obviously if there's a huge stack that there is acting as a filtering system, that's awesome. But in slide 6, you showed compacted foundation soil and a liner, and there's not one there. How has Mosaic managed that in such a way that would prohibit an environmental or a health situation in that particular site?
Okay. I'll leave that up to Sam El-Rabi, and Sam, if you could also concur with the information I just gave them, if I think that's accurate.
The gypsum stack you see in this picture here is the Plant City stack. The northern portion of it, the old one that started in 1960, the northern half is the inactive, and also it is not lined. When it was constructed in 1960, there were no liner requirement. They just compact the soil underneath and up it goes. The southern half is lined. It's lined with clay, lined with HDPE, which is thick plastic liner, and on top of that plastic, it's lined with 2 feet of compacted gypsum. So half of it is lined, half of it is not lined. The unlined portion on top to the north has a slurry wall around it. It's like a wall that goes all the way down to the confining clay layer unit. and around to keep any leakage that goes into the groundwater from migrating. And yes, they do have groundwater issues up there, historic, and there is a consent order with the state DEP that has been ongoing for a while and will be ongoing for the foreseeable future to pull that water and treat it and prevent it from migrating off-site. So that is being dealt under an enforcement consent order document for the unlined portion of the stack.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So for the closed stack, is if it were to get full because of an awful lot of rain, do they move it over to the lined stack? Is that how they manage the water for the closed stack?
The closed stack, on top of the stack, they line a pond on top of the stack with the HDPE liner, and that pond is used as a backup system for storage. It's used for evaporation and getting rid of some of that processed water. And it's part of the overall system circulation. Where it's needed, it will be drained. If it's not needed, it will sit on top. There is no fear of it leaking into the closed stack, and there's no fear of it overtopping or eroding, because if there is a wave action, that wave action will be against a high-density polyethylene liner, which is high-density, thick plastic liner. It's not soil that can erode.
Okay.
So, but that's part of their system management.
Okay, and then my last question, on slide 14, you talked about Mosaic's $500 million set aside. Clearly, are they regulated to keep that in order to manage the risks associated with a potential contamination? Is that why that is there? And I mean, obviously it's there for some reason, but what is that typically for? And is it a regulated line of credit or set aside?
Well, that is a state requirement, and the federal government has a requirement for them to set aside in various instruments these cash sums, and it's a combination of a cash sum, an insurance policy, an irrevocable letter of credit, that if they go belly up, that sits in there to take care of the closure, of management of the processed water, monitoring and care of the system as they retire these systems. Those kind of insurance policies, the state said, we're not going to be holding the bag if a company, declares bankruptcy and goes away. These instruments were not there, in the early days. And as we move forward, they are more enhanced and become more stringent. In here, the requirement by the state and the federal government for Mosaic, it meets, in fact, it exceeds the state requirement for financial assurance of closure and long-term monitoring of the existing stacks. Those documents are submitted to the state and the feds. State Tallahassee, not even the local district office. There are some confidentiality issues for business and proprietary stuff that we don't have access to these. We've never seen them, obviously, for business reasons. But our conversation with the state, that's where we get the numbers and stuff that is documented. We try to ascertain the facts that is documented before we bring it to you. But I appreciate Commissioner Smith saying we're not the entity that holds, all these documents and permits and instruments over Mosaic here. We're kind of third party peeking in and trying to drag things out of the state and the Fed. So the best we can tell, they provided to us, there is over $500 million set aside in place, along with a $50 million letter of credit as we speak now.
Excellent. Honestly, the good news is, unlike Piney Point, with a company that filed bankruptcy, and these protections obviously have not been, either were not in place at the time or have not been available. What's happening now in Hillsborough County, either through federal or state oversight, along with our vision into what's happening, is a much better circumstance, and we do have some protections, it sounds like, in place in the event that there was something that the company couldn't manage as a risk to our citizens. I really thank you for making that more clear, because this situation is obviously very different from what Manatee County is having to deal with, it sounds like. Thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cohen, you recognize.
Thank you, Commissioner Overman, for that, and I agree with that. That is very reassuring. There was something, though, that was said in your exchange that left me, I think, left the wrong impression. And let me just go back to it for just a moment. There is an unlined gypsum stack right on Tampa Bay. I think we were left with the impression that the only unlined parcel is the one up in Plant City, the half of the one up in Plant City, but there is one also right on Tampa Bay, and that's the one that we were talking about earlier that's 100 years old, that has about, it's been closed for 20 years and has about another 30 years in order to become inert, to use Commissioner White's word. So I just want to clarify that there is, you know, a radioactive presence right on the bay that in an unlined situation.
I thought that the stack on Tampa Bay was engineered, but I'll let Sam El-Rabi, both stacks were engineered. My understanding was it was the stack to the north of the old CF site, but Sam, can you
So let's clarify that.
Let's clarify that.
The stacks in Riverview. The stack on the left side, the west side, the closed stacks, is an unlined stack. This is an unlined stack. That was, like we said and showed, it started 100 years ago.
Okay.
As years go by and as the regulations became more stringent in the 70s, the states required that engineering be put in place, dike system be put in place around the stack, and that the structure will be stable as it goes up. So they could not undo the stack and line underneath, but they did around it. They did engineering around the stack, and they put the ditch system, the road system, the dams, and then the stacking up became engineering and much more structurally sound. But there is no liner on the left side or the west side that sits on the bay. On the east side, both stacks, or both portion of it, are lined. One is lined with HDPE liner, which is the bottom portion of it. The north portion is lined with clay. And on top of that, they put around the entire perimeter of the stack a slurry wall, which is a wall dug from grade, top of the ground, all the way down to the confining clay layer unit, and it's keyed in there and went all the way around it. So that forms a bathtub, if you will. If there is migration through that 2 feet of clay layer, it will be staying within the bounds of the stack. But then the HDPE liners became the standard for the industries in late 80s and 90s and beyond. So when they wanted to expand to the south, that HDPE liner was required in top of clay liner on the bottom. So there was like double or triple line requirement. But the most tough one is the HDPE line system that is put in place. So yes, we have a mixed lining requirement as years went around.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And the only reason I point this out is just because we need to be aware of it. We need to be aware that it's there and be watching it. I think it's very reassuring to know that we have a large, vibrant public company that's responsible for it, and letters of credit that are put away to protect us should things go awry. But it's still very important to have these discussions for us to know that it's there and for us to be keeping an eye on this for another 30 years because it's, you know, it's a sensitive part of the bay and a sensitive site. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Cohen. When, you know, we had the exposure of what was going on in the Gopher lead plant, I was blown away because, I mean, I grew up here and I had no idea that was going on. So it really is important that we have a big picture understanding of what what we have here and what are the measures in place protecting us, and have an idea of, how things went wrong and how we're working to make them stronger as we move forward. So within our boundaries, I was so glad to see this map. We've got the stack in Riverview and the one in Plant City. Now, the Plant City one is permanently closed, I'm understanding. Okay. But we do have other stacks outside our county that have impacts for us nonetheless. I mean, certainly the Piney Point stack, although that's physically in Manatee County, it has had enormous impacts for our bay, our fishermen, our recreational fishermen, as well as economic fishing interests and tourism, and our residents here. And similarly, though I think it's the one in Mulberry that used to spill into the Alafaya when it was Gardenier back in the day that I was growing up, and have big fish kills there, but that's outside our county, yet that's the one that just recently had big sinkholes open up. And now yesterday or the day before, it had a tank failure, spilling 1,700 gallons of phosphoric acid. So although we do have more modern protections and oversight and financial plan B now that we didn't have for the Piney Point owners, the original Piney Point miners, they packed up and left when they went bankrupt, and we didn't have hundreds of millions. Now we have to pay hundreds of millions. The fact of the matter is that there are still occasional failures. Can anybody tell us about the Mulberry mine, the situation there? Is that a Mosaic facility, and is that an old one with outdated, vested against current protections, or have they just had a couple of accidents? Does anybody know anything about that one? I know this is outside your presentation, but
Commissioner, I have a recommendation. Why don't we bring that back to the next meeting? There are approximately 20-plus sites. They are all owned by Mosaic in the West Central Florida area. Commissioner White is very familiar with the one. That's the IMC one that had the sinkhole. Residents in Keysville needed to receive water. It was a mile from our border. You're talking about another facility, the Mulberry facility. So why don't we bring back another presentation for September or October to give you those details of the other facilities that are outside our boundaries.
That's good. It wouldn't have to be this in-depth, but just maybe a map
Right.
And an understanding of the age of some of those and what the vulnerabilities are.
Yeah, and Commissioner, I just wanted to clarify, many of them have gone through complete closure already of those stacks. They are closed. I did want to say the CFs, the old CF stack, the Plant City stack, the Mosaic stack that currently exists, it just received a closure application. The facility is closed that would use the process water over and over. But the stack is not closed and is currently, just as Piney Point was, is undergoing closure activities as we speak.
Which one is that?
Plant City.
Okay.
So we have Plant City and Riverview. And the other thing I did want to clarify with Sam, and I do apologize, Commissioner Cohen. Yes, obviously you see those 38 to 40, all the gypsum's getting stacked up, but I do, and so there isn't that, and it was engineered, but it wasn't engineered like the other stacks. But I do want to clarify for you and the public, I want to make sure, Sam, is there a lined stack on top of the Riverview facility that exists right on the bay that they use to put in overflow water?
Yes, the water that you see on top of the closed stack to the left, the retired stack, Those compartments sit in HDPE lined compartments. Those are lined and they don't leak and they don't go anywhere. Yes, the top is lined.
The top is lined, okay. Well, thank you. The bottom is not constructed as the new one is, but the top one is lined and does receive overflow process water. Okay, thank you.
And I have another question. Before most of us got here, this county voted to accept processed water, or allow Mosaic to expand one of their mines to accept processed water from another county. Where is that being done?
You know, Commissioner, I'd have to bring that back to you. I'm not sure it's processed water. I think it was clay settling area, and it could be
right.
some of that material that's coming in for the processing at the plant. Again, I can research that. It's definitely, I want to say down in the Hardee County area, the West Central Florida area. I'm not really sure. There's many different mines, which mines that material would be coming into. But all of the rock is coming from outside of our county into here for processing. We really don't, we have almost, if I'm not mistaken, and we can bring that back too, almost concluded any mining within this county. So it's all outside of these counties' borders. But the processing, IMC plant, the old IMC plant, the Mosaic plant that's on our border is the largest processing facility, but Riverview is a large processing facility too. So that rock comes from outside. But we'll get those questions answered.
That would be, yeah, that would be appropriate in the bigger picture to understand what that water is that's coming. I believe you're right. I think it was Hardee County that is coming from to some clay settling ponds within our county. So just to have an understanding.
And I couldn't remember, but I wasn't sure that the board voted to accept that. I don't know if
Yep, they voted
did?
to
Okay.
allow
To
that.
allow it to continue to come
That
in?
was
Okay.
in 2018 before most of us were seated here.
Okay. We will get you those answers and come back in a future presentation.
Okay, and we have Commissioner White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I definitely want the experts to bring the information back to the board, but I do believe that it is clay settling material that was brought from Hardee County into our county in the Four Corners area for clay settling. I was on the board at the time, voted against the measure. I just didn't think it was right. Janet, I do appreciate you mentioning the sinkhole from a few years back. At my urging, Mosaic provided bottled water to the citizens on the Hillsborough side that were potentially impacted for a period of time and offered well monitoring for a period of time. But I think it is, Madam Chair, a great idea for Ms. Doherty to bring back sort of an accounting of what we have out there so that we can have undergo a risk assessment. So, and this is probably just an appropriate time for me to mention this. I actually, could mention it now, which I'm going to, or could have waited for the red tide report. But I just want to say, much like I said at a Board of County Commissioners meeting, I want to stand prepared to take any legal action that we might be able to take against the owner of the Piney Point facility. I know when you look at the science, it's complex and it's difficult to establish a cause and effect relationship. When you look at the exacerbation of red tide and the fish kills. So I would just say that if the scientists reach a point in time that they can establish cause with respect to the Piney Point facility, that we take any action necessary to offset our costs for cleanups and for mitigation of red tide exacerbation and possibly even action that would allow us to set up perhaps some kind of a fund to help industries that rely on a healthy Tampa Bay, like the commercial fishing industry, fishing guides, things like that. I don't know that we're there right now. I know the science is complex and we have to establish a cause and effect relationship, a definitive one or as definitive as possible. But if we get to that point, I would like for staff on both sides, here and BOCC, to be prepared.
Thank you. I would be very, very supportive of any measures we could take to recover from the responsible parties some of the losses that we've suffered in this county. I just think it's so wonderful we have this pollution recovery fund here with the Environmental Protection Commission that does exactly that with many other cases. So we may be in a good position to do something along those lines. We'll see. But certainly, great idea. I would be very supportive of. Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you. And actually, along those lines, given that we've got a future item to come back to us, one of the things that I noticed when the Piney Point started going up, it was that the risk was actually in the bay. You know, what was happening in our rivers and our bay ended up causing where the risk was to impact the industries, to impact our fishermen, and possibly feed, red tide, those kinds of things. So in the report back to where gypsum-related facilities are those facilities that would actually impact the bay. So, it doesn't have to be our direct neighbor. It needs to be, the counties around us or the facilities around us that could possibly cause an environmental hazard to either rivers or the bay that we would end up having to deal with because the bay doesn't have a county line. It doesn't. When it impacts that waterway, it impacts our businesses, whether they live in, one county and work here. So I would ask that, any facilities within our region that would actually have access to waterways that would impact those waterways, I think is sort of the guideline in terms of coming back to us to show where the risk is. As I think that, not that we can do anything about those areas at this point, I think for awareness purposes and risk management strategies that we could address, I think that's an important piece to come back to us, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Cohen, you're recognized.
This is such an important topic. I'm glad we're talking about it and giving it some time this morning. Commissioner White, to your point, because of the portfolio of boards that I sit on from here, Tampa Bay Water, Port Tampa Bay, and the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, I can tell you that all three are, and the EPC, by the way, the fourth, but all of these entities are looking very closely, not just monitoring the event, but trying to make that cause and effect link, trying to establish it, trying to figure out whether or not they can prove it scientifically. And I want you to know that I agree. I just want to tell you that if we find ourselves in a position to be able to move forward, I do think that we should take legal action. And I can tell you that, Pinellas County's got 24 municipalities, and they've all got a different story of how their economy was affected by this red tide episode. The port is looking for the cruise ship to come back. And obviously there's concern if the condition of the bay is such that people aren't going to want to visit here. Tampa Bay Water is concerned about the future of the desal plant and whether or not the filters can handle this polluted water that is coming in. So everybody's got a vested interest in this one way or another. And, I think that they're all looking at it very, very hard. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. And seeing no other commissioners, I just want to wrap up by saying I think we're very fortunate to have an Environmental Protection Commission here in Hillsborough County and to have this venue where, as commissioners and environmental protection commissioners, we can have these conversations and be informed by the professionals on our staff. As I watch, but we've talked about how there's state and federal regulations and their authority to deal with this. But as I watch the Manatee County Commission struggling with what they're going to do with this water inside their county, whether they're going to inject it, and the fact that it's Manatee County's public utilities has been taking up to 150,000 gallons a day of this water for years, bleeding it into their systems. I mean, there's a layer of this that the Manatee County Commission has been dealing with that, we need to understand how and be prepared for what we may need to handle inside our borders, as well as we've said, looking at the impacts and how we can join with regional other governments and agencies to deal with the regional impacts. So thank you very much, Mr. El-Rabi and Ms. Doherty, for spending this time with us, preparing this for us, and informing us, and then being willing to come back again and share your expertise and perspective and understanding of some of the questions that are coming to us from this discussion, but great discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I do want to thank the science team. Sam El-Rabi, he has 30-plus years. He worked at the DEP. Ed Kopic, 25-plus years, worked at the DEP. Paula Noblet, she's worked at the DEP 30-plus years. Tom Ash, worked 30-plus years, but has been at the DEP. So these people have state knowledge as well as local knowledge, but they've been with us forever. Tom Ash, Chris Pratt. So we have the best scientists looking into this, and I want to thank each and every one of them, and especially you, Sam El-Rabi. Thank you so much. And before we move on to the next item, I did want to mention, I had sent out an email to everybody, but the board had talked about the banning of phosphogypsum for road base, and you guys were ahead of the curve. That decision came down from the EPA last October, and this board, I think Commissioner Hagan brought the item to you to discuss and to talk about, and you had put a moratorium on utilizing that material, and the EPA has reversed its position. So now phosphogypsum will not be used in road base anymore, but you were ahead of that when you voted to ban it in this county. So I just wanted to say that as a matter of fact of something that just occurred.
Thank you. And I'm hearing a little feedback, if everybody would, okay, that's good. And that takes us to our next presentation, the Red Tide update. I'll hand it over to Ms. Doherty to introduce.
Thank you. And again, one of our premier scientists, Tom Ash, he serves on the Nitrogen Management Consortium, the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and many others. He's got 34 plus years with our agency. We'll give the Red Tide update. Tom?
I'm going to go ahead and share. Okay, so the already a little bit of lively discussion about the red tide, so I'll just keep that going. And a little brief history on red tide. The organism that causes Florida red tide, Corynea brevis, has been around for quite a while. This is not something new. This is not a new phenomenon. For us or for anyone in Florida. It was first scientifically documented in the mid-1800s, and it was actually I believe been documented or informally documented by Spanish explorers even before that. So the main gist of it is that it's driven by wind and ocean currents and weather. So as we've all seen in the news lately, where red tide goes is predictable to a point. As far as we can predict ocean currents and weather, we can kind of predict where it will go. It does produce powerful brevetoxins that affect the central nervous system of many animals, manatees, dolphins, certainly fish. For humans, it's more of an irritant. It irritates your eyes or your respiratory system when it gets aerosolized by wave action and strong wind. It does usually cause large fish kills, but it's typically offshore all the time in lower concentrations. It's only when it moves onshore that it becomes an issue for us. And it's typically only in saltwater or saltier water environments. The upper right picture there is a scanning electron micrograph of the organism itself, one of the cells. And the one underneath I wanted to show you is, this is what it looks like under a microscope at much lower magnification. This is what we would typically see, what FWC would typically see in their microscopes. And it's important to point out the orangey color that you see, that brownish orangey color, the chloroplast of an organism. That's what gives the tide its name, and that's what makes the water tinge that kind of reddish tea color. As you know, historically, we have had, of our 270 some odd water quality stations throughout Hillsborough County, 52 of them are in Tampa Bay. We have over 50 years, or just now about 50 years of monthly water quality data on all the stations you see there. And we divide the bay up into Old Tampa Bay, Middle Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, Lower Tampa Bay. And we divide, we do these runs in manageable bites so that we can go out and monitor each bay segment each month. We've been doing that routinely, and fortunately or fortuitously perhaps, we're actually there in Lower Tampa Bay near Port Manatee near this discharge 1 week prior to the actual event. So that kind of highlights the importance of knowing what's going on, having that historical knowledge, and having that monitoring already in place for so many years. We have copious amounts of background data on that area. When we first learned of the discharge, the initial focus was on stations surrounding Port Manatee. We immediately kind of homed in on that area. And then as USF's ocean current models and NOAA satellite imagery kind of proved out, we were able to use those images to kind of predict where we needed to focus in the future. And it became evident that we needed to refocus and expand our efforts a little farther to the south and widen that ring of stations. We also rely heavily on the field verification of the imagery, and vice versa. The going out and actually ground truth and collecting samples and proving and verifying what the models are seeing, what the imagery is seeing, is vital. It lets us know we're on the right track, and it also lets the modelers that design these satellites and the predictive models know that they're on the right track, and it lets them calibrate those. But you know, even though EPC has had a major role in a lot of this incident, we are not the lead agency. FWC still remains the lead anywhere in the state of Florida on the sampling and mapping efforts of Karenia brevis. So a lot of folks might ask why is EPC of Hillsborough County even involved in monitoring this incident at all? Within that red circle, you see Port Manatee, and the yellow lines depict the outline of Hillsborough County. And if we zoom in a little bit there, that red arrow is pointing to the area in the port that the discharge water was going to. And you can see that this discharge is not very far from Hillsborough County's line. And if you go even a little farther west, you can also see it's not very far from Pinellas County's line. So that's why this incident became kind of an all-hands-on-deck event for anyone doing habitat resource and water quality monitoring in the Tampa Bay area. Everybody came to the party when this event occurred. As I mentioned, the satellite imagery gives us a feel for where to go, what's happening. You kind of get that large view, and this area in the green here along the eastern shoreline of Tampa Bay, right near, ironically enough, Port Manatee, is a pretty good indication. This is on the 8th of April, and this shows that we're on the right track. There was an immediate response to the discharge from Piney Point, and as it turns out, we were able to verify all the elevated chlorophyll levels in this area, and even a week later, there was a bloom, then there was a slight die-off, and then if you look to that panel over to your right, you can also see the chlorophyll blooming up again about a week later after the discharge. So these are very helpful tools, and they helped us direct. And you can also see in that image on the right how things kind of slid farther to the south. And that's why I said we knew shortly after the incident we would refocus our monitoring efforts to the south based on the wind and current trajectories we were getting at the time. This is a slide from the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. I'm not this clever, so it's a very good slide. And I'm not going to go point by point, but I'll let you do that on your own. I just want to point out that the incident for the first discharge began on March 30th or thereabouts, and it was over by the 9th. But as you saw in the previous slide, even on the 8th of April, we were already seeing an immediate biological response by the bay to this nutrient load. The Carenia was first showing up in the south part of the bay, down near Anna Maria Island, creeping up the coast and into the bay. And then it reached bloom levels around mid-May, mid to late May, and then into June. We know, there are things we know and things we don't know. And as Commissioner White and Commissioner Cohen indicated earlier, there are things that we need to really look at the data. It's still too soon after this event. We still have to look at a lot of data, crunch a lot of numbers to have a definitive idea of, did Piney Point have some impact on or interaction with the red tide bloom in Tampa Bay? There is a preponderance of evidence, circumstantial evidence, that it did. However, again, we need to look at more data for that. One thing we are positive about, and have been for many years, is nutrients in the bay tend to feed and exacerbate these kind of events, whether it's Carenia brevis, whether it's Lingbia, whether it's any number of different plankton blooms that occur in the bay in any given year. We know that excessive nutrients do feed and tend to extend these kind of events. So what may have been a shorter duration event for red tide could perhaps, or likely was perhaps, prolonged by this additional influx of nutrients. We are, after all, talking about a year's worth of nitrogen load in lower Tampa Bay that occurred over about a 9-day period. So we've done extremely well as a community, as a region, to reduce those nutrient loads in Tampa Bay since the 70s and 80s, and spent most of the 90s and 2000s recovering. And it just goes to show how fragile the bay can be at times. It will recover. We have to give it that opportunity to recover, but it doesn't take too much to tip things out of balance. And it would seem that this event did that. Next slide is the height. Again, this imagery, the height of the event was about mid-July. And you can see on the right images from about the 13th to the 19th, this was when the bay was at its worst. Overlaid on this imagery is all of the sampling done by FWC. The imagery itself, the satellite imagery, is a USF product, and it's very helpful in showing us over larger time periods where everything was going on. And when you look at this, it's very daunting to know that that the bay was in this condition just a month ago. The red tide fish kills that are reported to FWC are all overlaid on this map. And as you know, we have at EPC and the county and your offices have all received citizen complaints on fish kills in citizens' neighborhoods. Fish kills were reported everywhere from downtown Tampa, Bayshore Boulevard, MacDill Air Force Base, Apollo Beach, and particularly Apollo Beach, you see a small cluster of blooms there. And it got very busy there around mid-July. And our imagery from, or our sampling from EPC shows that in late June, the Corynea numbers were very high. Most of the stations, all but two of the stations we sampled, represented in this map, had cell counts higher than 1 million cells per liter. That's extremely high. And then we saw the ensuing fish kills after that, particularly in the Apollo Beach area. And you can see how just a month later, there is no Corynea detected in the bay. So again, wind, tide, currents all have moved this event, not just within Tampa Bay, but all along the southwestern coast of Florida, have moved this event around. Every day the map is different, and it's a very tricky beast to try to track down. And mentioning the Apollo Beach area, I would be remiss if I didn't call out our Hillsborough County partners. This is the crews from the Marine Safety Office, from the Emergency Operations Center, working those canals in Apollo Beach, out there in and amongst it, cleaning up these fish. And as a resident of St. Petersburg and living on a canal, I can tell you my canal looked even worse than this. It is a horrendous thing to have to live through. So it's very fortunate and very positive thing when the county crews mobilized and started cleaning up these fish. As you can see, it would have been a very daunting task for your average citizen to try to clean up this many dead fish in their canal. Again, Marine Safety Office, Parks and Conservation, the ELAP folks, Solid Waste, Public Information Office, trying to get the messaging out to the public. And also the citizens themselves, going out and volunteering, bagging up fish. And a huge shout out to the commercial fishing, the guides and the commercial fishing industry in general. They switched gears, they mobilized. Instead of catching live fish and live shrimp, they started catching dead fish and other dead things floating around in the bay. And without those folks, this mess would be a lot larger than it wound up being. While all of this was going on, as if that wasn't bad enough, we had 3 compounding factors in the bay. We had concurrent blooms going on in Middle Tampa Bay. That's most of this larger reddish and yellow area you see near St. Petersburg and down near the Skyway Bridge. But we also had blooms in Old Tampa Bay, now a perennial called Pyrodinium. It is persistent. It is something that the scientific community has been trying to address and will continue to try to address. And then also in Hillsborough Bay, we had a bloom of a species we usually see there in lower numbers, and 2 different species of dinoflagellates in that part of the bay. So as you can imagine, our summer has been extremely busy trying to keep a hold of all of this. So better news, this is where we are now, or at least as of earlier this week. And as you can see in the imagery, a lot of gray dots in Tampa Bay. There are still some hits earlier this week, Pasco County, northern Pinellas County. It's gotten a little better, and a lot of the bloom has moved somewhat offshore of Pinellas County, giving the beaches a break for at least a little while. And the fish kills on the right, you will see that the Tampa Bay area is responding pretty well. It's not great. We were out there yesterday doing our monitoring in lower Tampa Bay. We didn't see any dead fish, maybe one or two drifting in from the Gulf, but nothing to be alarmed about. But the water's still not quite right. The water clarity is a little off. The dissolved oxygen levels, both at the surface and the bottom, are a little off. So, as was indicated earlier, these kind of things take a long time to play out, and how the bay will respond to it and cleanse itself still remains to be seen. This imagery is just from a couple of days ago from the NOAA Copernicus Sentinel-3 satellite. And on the panel on the right, you see a lot of fluorescence of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a proxy for red tide or any larger bloom. And as you can see, Tampa Bay is looking pretty good, even down into a little bit of Manatee County, not looking too bad. But the beaches and the beach communities from Sarasota to Venice, and now starting to see some indications in the Captiva, Port Charlotte, Sanibel area, they're really starting to get hammered down there pretty good. So, but fortunately for us, hopefully we have already lived through that, and hopefully this thing will start to go away. Again, in addition to all the county partners and the community, we couldn't do this. It takes a village. And the entire scientific community and all of the municipalities have, as I said, this has been an all-hands-on-deck event. They've all contributed in their way, done additional monitoring, chipped in where we needed to, and helped Manatee County. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the estuary program as kind of being our ringmaster. They brought all of these entities together. They were a fairly natural focal point for all of the data, and I just think we need to send a huge thank you to all of these organizations. They've done a phenomenal job with the science and the field work that they've produced. And with that, I would like to ask or answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. That has been a very wonderful, meaty, and yet succinct presentation of this terrible red tide event and the current status, the history and the status of it. And thank you for highlighting how fortunate we are to have not only our own EPC here and our own as you say, departments from Parks to ELAP that pitched in with the cleanup, but these other regional agencies working together, Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and the universities, as well as the other counties, who all came together, working hard and sharing data, studying the impacts, and working hard to clean up the fish kills so they wouldn't continue fueling that bloom in a vicious cycle, and we could get out of that as quickly as possible. We are fortunate that we have this ongoing data collection and monitoring of our EPC and partner agencies, so we understand the baseline when we want to ask, well, what happened from Piney Point? We have proof that that this much is different and new and on top of our baseline and our seasonal historic data. So we have a lot to be grateful for. And thank you for that presentation. Commissioner Cohen, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I just want to say again, reiterate our appreciation and thanks to not just everyone that worked on gathering the scientific data, because that's been extremely important, but to the people that picked up the fish.
Yeah.
It is really disgusting work. And like you said, Commissioner Smith, if they're left there, they compound the problem by deteriorating. I just wanted to ask, you touched on where we are now. We are still in hurricane season for the next couple of months. How does the weather affect whether or not we expect another red tide bloom? There seems to be a consensus that red tide is very irritating for people, but does it actually have health risks associated with it? And then the final question I just want to ask is, is it safe to go to the beach, and do we expect that the beaches that are going to continue to be safe for the next few months? Or are we expecting perhaps another bout of this? What are we expecting over the next couple of months?
Tom, I'll let you answer that. I think it's a very fluid situation. It just depends on how the hurricane comes in, where the wind is blowing. It looks like a good scenario for Tampa Bay right at the moment, but I think it all depends on how the hurricane hits us and moves that either out to the ocean or into us. Tom, do you have anything else to add? I guess he dropped off.
Tom, muted.
No.
Tom, you're muted.
Tom, I'm going to unmute you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can.
Oh, sorry, that must have been remote. There's a lot of variability, and as Ms. Darby said, it's a very fluid situation, depending on how the hurricane hits us, where it comes from, the winds, the currents. In general, when we're in the middle of an event like this, we kind of look forward to, it sounds weird, but we kind of look forward to an event like an ELSA that will just kind of graze us, but drop a lot of rain, freshen up the bay, because one of the things that compounded this red tide in particular is that the bay was very salty leading up to this red tide. We have not had a lot of rain. There have not been a lot of fresh water coming down the rivers. Now that's a double-edged sword. The Carenia doesn't like fresher water, but with that rain you deposit a lot of nutrients from stormwater runoff, fertilizers, things like that, into the bay. So it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. You want the rain, you want to salt or freshen up the bay, but you also don't want all the nutrients that may come with it. As far as the public health issues go, the beaches, all during the height of this event, each beach community and the Department of Health had websites that people could go to and apps that people could go to that told them if the beach they wanted to visit that day had dead fish on it, whether it had red tide, what the counts were. There are public health issues to consider. Certainly anybody with respiratory issues, COPD, asthma, bronchitis, those conditions could be exacerbated, and there could be breathing issues. That's why part of the team that I mentioned earlier with the county also involves the health department, and we track, they track emergency room site visits and things like that, and people going to clinics and emergency rooms with conditions or with symptoms specific to what would be expected in red tide. It's another way that we track the impact of the red tide. So which beach you want to go to. Again, I would encourage you to go online or visit one of those apps. And those beach communities do a very good job of updating those on a daily basis.
Thank you, and I just have a question for the chair. When are we taking up the fertilizer ordinance? Is it September 1st? Is it coming up soon?
It will either be September 1st or September 22nd. I'm waiting for word on that. We will be taking it up in September. Yes.
Thank you. Look forward to that.
Thank you. And, right, when we had discussions about fertilizer ordinances 11 years ago in Pinellas and City of Tampa, I know you recall supporting that. It was my recollection, and maybe Mr. Ash can help me with that, but it was my recollection that we had talked about if Hillsborough were to implement a fertilizer ordinance, we would be able to hold out some amount of tons, 4.5 tons of nitrogen, fertilizer, nutrients out of the bay annually that contribute to these kinds of blooms. Mr. Ash, were you able to dig back in your memory banks for an accurate figure there?
I was not, unfortunately. I know but I do recall those conversations, and at the time we were talking tens of tons. So it is not an insignificant amount. And so that is something that I remember specifically likening to the equivalent of 2 or 3 small wastewater treatment plant effluents. So it was not an insignificant amount. As we know now, there is no insignificant amount. The bay will respond, the organisms within it will respond to those nutrient loads, and depending on how much that is and the conditions, it will respond either mildly or very dramatically to all this stuff.
Thank you very much. And you had one slide here talking about 3 kinds of algae in the bay concurrently, in addition to the red tide, Carenia brevis. But we have off and on several different kinds of algae bloom that release neurotoxins that kill fish in our bay. So the blue-green algae, I think, as well as you mentioned Lingbia that can form mats that shade out seagrass. And in fact, we've lost several thousand acres of seagrass in Tampa Bay over the last couple of years. Can you speak a little bit about the other organisms besides red tide that we would do well to try to limit our pollution and nutrient fertilizer releases into the bay in order to reduce those organisms and their impacts?
Yes, Commissioner. The one in particular is the Pyrodinium bahaments, which typically occurs in Old Tampa Bay from Oldsmar all the way down to normally no farther south than the Gandy Bridge, and usually even north of the Howard Franklin Bridge. That species, even though it has the ability to produce toxins, in Tampa Bay it quite often does not. In Southwest Florida it quite often does not. It actually is a species, if anybody's ever been to Puerto Rico, there's an area called Fajardo Bay, and they call it bioluminescent bay. And it's actually a tourist attraction. I've done it. You get to kayak at night through fluorescent water. It's very cool. It's an amazing experience. But they protect Pyridinium bahamense. For that reason, it is, you can't wear sunscreens, you can't have shampoos or even perfumes when you're on these trips because they don't want anything to disrupt that organism. For us, it tends more to bloom at levels that shade out the seagrasses. The light does not have a chance to penetrate all the way to the bottom of the bay, therefore the seagrass can't photosynthesize. Occasionally, a small localized fish kill from mainly oxygen depletion. But generally, we're worried more about pyridinium from the stance of flushing, nutrient flushing in Old Tampa Bay, and just those persistent blooms that tend to shade out and keep seagrass from being able to grow as it should in that part of the bay.
Thank you. I've seen those fluorescent events in Tampa Bay as I was growing up occasionally, and you know, my parents would call us out to the water, and we would throw things in or stir it around and have that effect. It is beautiful, and I've seen it once in the mouth of the Little Manatee River since I've been there in the last 20 years. So I know sometimes these exotic invasive species can be have their beautiful side. One last question from me before I move on. We have been exceeding our TMDLs for Old Tampa Bay, total minimum daily loads for Old Tampa Bay for 2 years running. Is that which minimum, which loads? Is that nitrogen specifically that we're exceeding?
It has the total maximum daily load.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
And it's that maximum for chlorophyll, generally. And again, that ties back to the persistent pyridinium bloom. So if the bay goes more than 2 years in a row with those exceedances, then we have to start taking management actions to address that and coordinate very closely with DEP based on the bay's reasonable assurance document.
Thank you for clearing that up. Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Dash, for your report. That's very helpful. Of course, not being the scientist, I still have questions. But to your point, we are bringing the fertilizer ban issues forward, and I think I heard you say that in April, because the bay had not had a lot of rain, that there was less algae and or incidents of bloom but then that was exacerbated by the rains as they began. Part of that is the nitrogen load. Part of that may be fresh water load. Part of it may just be trash that ends up coming out of the stormwater systems. But have we been able to really identify or make the correlation between rains and the blooms as it pertains to nitrogen and phosphorus and other things that go into the bay? Because if we're looking to create some policy around what's best practices for protecting the bay, would it be best to consider rainfall as a guiding timeline rather than, just pick a series of months? Because as we've noticed, or at least I've noticed, we used to have our dry period was December and January. That's now moved, January, February of late. And so the time period is more related to nature than it is, it seems, than calendar. And I was curious if you could give us some observations or some guidelines on how rainfall plays a part in that, because I think that's going to be important in how we structure our policy guidelines. Could you help with that?
I could try, Commissioner. The rainfall does have an impact, particularly those first few heavy rainfalls in the season. You'll get what's known as the first flush. You'll see a lot of leaf litter, a lot of organic matter that are in streams, ditches, tributaries that get flushed out on a heavy rain event into the bay. So the bay has to first deal with this huge load up front, and then as the season goes on, that tapers a little bit, but there's still a baseline or a consistent load coming from rain events. When you start to talk about identifying which nutrients come from which source, that gets extremely tricky. The science isn't nearly there yet. Once those things are all mixed into a given ditch or pond or tributary and then flushed out into the bay, tracing an atom of nitrogen back to where it originally came from is virtually impossible, unless you do some very sophisticated isotopic tracking, and even then it gets tricky. The mantra now, as it was back in 2010 and 2009 when we first started talking about fertilizer rules and ordinances, is the focus should be on keeping the nitrogen and keeping those nutrients out of the system to begin with. We know for sure that they're much easier and much less expensive to deal with before you put them in the system than they are once they're there. If you have 5 bags of M&Ms and they're all different colors, once you mix them up, it's very difficult to pull all the colors back out again. But if you just keep them from going in there to begin with, you can maintain that load much more easily, and probably orders of magnitude cheaper than trying to remove it after the fact.
Excellent, thank you very much.
And a last question, we've been seeing extreme numbers of manatee deaths, partly by starvation this year from the effect of algae shading out seagrass and starving them. Most of that is occurring, I think, in the Indian River or Lagoon area, but is that also, could that impact the manatees that we see in our area when you talk about this paridium shading out and killing thousands of acres of seagrass in our bay?
Certainly as a food source for manatees and as an indicator of overall environmental health, we want to do as much as we can to make sure our seagrass beds are healthy and that they're flourishing. A lot of the die-off we're seeing now is, to be clear, is probably not attributable to anything that has happened this year. As I was saying earlier, there tend to be time lags between a human-caused event or human-induced pollution and a biological response that happens in nature. The seagrass losses that we're seeing now this year are likely a result of the last red tide from 2018 and 2019. We don't, Swift Mud flies aerials and does a lot of extensive seagrass monitoring. We do a lot of boots on the ground in the Tampa Bay area, EPC, Pinellas County, Manatee County, and a whole host of other organizations are out there in the water with masks and snorkels on, measuring and monitoring the health of seagrass every year. But I don't want to leave the impression that anything that's happened this summer so far is why we're seeing those losses. Whether we will see equivalent or comparable losses in the future from this event still remains to be seen. But again, anytime we lose that amount of seagrass, they do tend to flux, but this is a significant amount of seagrass. I don't think anybody's panicking yet, but it certainly has our attention.
Thank you very much. And seeing no other questions or discussions from the board, I'll just thank you once again, Mr. Ash, and express our gratitude for your decades of experience with EPC and monitoring our bay, including red tide. We are so fortunate to have such depth and breadth of knowledge in our professionals of our Environmental Protection Commission. And I will turn that over to Ms. Doherty for the Executive Director's report.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I just wanted for members of the public to know that, to let them know that EPC has the longest continuous water monitoring in the nation. And that's good to have that data, because when Piney Points happen or sewage releases happen, we can ascertain where we were before and where we are now. And I do want to thank the other scientists, Barb Getting and her water monitoring team. They're amazing. And Joe Barron in the lab. They work with Tom, and they do a great job. So thank you guys very much. And to Commissioner Cohen, I did want to let you know that sometimes, many times during the rainy season, there are beach closures from E. coli that happen from overflows from wastewater treatment as well. So, but we work with the Department of Health, and they notify people. So it's not only fish kills sometimes, it could be a double whammy there during the rainy season. So, and with that, I'll move directly into my Executive Director report. If Mr. Brewer could bring up the slides. I just have a couple of quick slides to run through. That's the last slide. That's our next EPC meeting. So the first slide begins with the roundtable discussion that we had with Congresswoman Castor. Thank you. That's the first slide. Next slide, please. It was on August 12th. It was a very, she asked us, and we put it on within a week, and the fishermen were there. Commissioner Cohen was there. Senator Cruz was there. Unfortunately, our chairman had a conflict for a prior engagement, but we met with all sorts of stakeholders, and it was very illuminating, and I hope we get together, because I think Commissioner Cohen would agree that there were a lot of good questions asked, and to keep that team together, maybe quarterly or biannually.
It's outstanding, yes, thank you.
Yeah, so we're trying to build a Save Our Bay action plan with all those stakeholders, and we hope everyone can participate. Next slide, please. This is a FLAIR special recognition. The FLAIR is the Florida Local Environmental Resource Agencies, and they presented Husheng Bustani, who retired after 42 years, with the Rick Wilkins Lifetime Achievement Award. And that was on August 5th, 2021 in Sarasota, Florida. And I will tell you, the red tide was there, and there were a lot of dead fish there as well in that area. But we're so happy and thankful to have had Husheng Bustani and all the knowledge that he imparted to our agency. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The environmental and business feedback groups met in May. These were formed under Dr. Garrity. I kept them intact and have added people throughout the years. We've lost some people as well, unfortunately. We are proud to have the feedback groups continue to meet virtually and provide EPC useful advice of both the citizenry and the regulated community. This one that you're looking at, we try to do a screenshot. We can't get everyone, but you'll notice people like Mary Figg, Barb Adderhold, and people like Eugenia, Dr. Garrity, Sid Flannery, and others. The next slide is the business feedback group. And this was an opportunity as well to introduce Stephanie Wickham, our newest waste director, to the business feedback group. This was Husheng Bustani's group. He heads up this group. Sam heads up the environmental feedback group. And in this slide, you'll see some of the people: Everett Morrow, Frank Hearn, who's a local attorney, Harry Lerner, and Jamie Scarola. Next slide. On July 27th, we met with the Director of Fleet Management, Robert Stein, and we try to do this annually. He is just an amazing resource for Hillsborough County. And we review our policy, asset, and financial data at that time. So thank you so much, Bob, to you and your staff. Next slide. In June, Hillsborough County Sheriff Corporal Dana Chansey and Sergeant Handrick met with EPC staff. Corporal Chansey has recently been assigned to be our lead contact for environmental issues, and we do a lot of joint complaint investigations with the Sheriff's Department. This meeting was a good opportunity for us to introduce our programs and complaint types, go over our past activities with the county, with the Sheriff's Department, and assist with our communications going forward. And I think this was the first time that we were able to utilize our new conference room. So thank you again, and a shout out to Dan Moore from the Water Division for organizing this meeting, and Frank for having recommended it to put it on. Next slide, please. 2 of our wetland scientists have received the Certified Wetlands CWE certification. In order to achieve this designation, scientists must complete 5 wetland delineation exams with scores of 80% or greater. And this is a very, very difficult exam, right up there with the Florida bar. The exams cover all elements of wetland delineation and are recognized by the FDEP, EPA, and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for delineation competency. You probably know about the 404 delegation down to the state and down to us. Only the state now can set formal delineations, but you must be a CWE, and we're trying to work that out with SwiftMud and ourselves to be able to do those formal delineations. EPC staff certification is key for the Wetlands Division to remain a leader in local wetlands protection, and great job to Abby Weeks and Bob Owens. Next slide, please. May marks the annual celebration of our Wetlands Month. I wish to give a big shout out to our wetlands staff teams who paired up to serve as videographers and tour hosts for a weekly video series featuring the flora and fauna of our local wetlands. Staff gave personalized guided tours of 4 of our beautiful Hillsborough County parks, encouraging citizens to get out to explore, enjoy, and celebrate the unique natural wetland wonders that each has to offer. The tour series is available for viewing on our YouTube channel. Next slide. This year, our Clean Air Fair theme was Treasure Our Environment. It was meant to recognize our local environmental champions and to emphasize that we must all work together to protect our environment and community for the future. Environment of Champions Photo Challenge. Over 50 photos were submitted by the local environmental champions, from oyster reef restoration to collecting waste, planting trees, and using battery power to get around town. Our local partners and citizens illustrate their work as our teammates to be good stewards and to protect our environment and community for the future. We are all in this together, and we applaud our champions for their great work and are honored to have them on our team. And the final slide is that, thank you very much, Commissioners. This concludes our meeting, unless you have any other questions. And next month, we will be bringing seagrasses to you. So that is our next presentation. It is a short, abbreviated time frame. Our meeting is September 9th.
Thank you very much, and we will have some action items on that agenda as well, so I appreciate everybody making a note of that date on their calendar. Is there any future items any of the other commissioners would like to discuss, or anything to bring up? And seeing none, we're adjourned.
Thank you, Commissioner.